Hi, everyone. Erica Sietsma, host of Creators in Coffee and CEO and founder of Autofluencer, joining me today. You may know him as American Muscle HD, or Garrett is the name, Garrett Reed, and he's also got Weapon Vault, so multiple social personalities there. Welcome, Garrett.
How's it going?
Awesome, awesome. Well, so good to have you. And just a small fraction of your shoe collection is
Yeah,
joining
yeah,
us.
just a little bit of what I got.
Yes, one time we'll have to come back and do an entire shoe episode.
That'd be cool.
I still think they need their own Instagram page. So
I've been considering it. It's just again, like we mentioned, that's just a whole nother thing to
I
do.
know it's one more thing. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Was super excited to have you on. Been following you for a while now. I love what you built. If you are not familiar with American Muscle HD, as someone watching this, he's got 2.4 million followers on Instagram. That's a giant number. You've been at it for what? How many years now have you had that page?
11. A long
11
time.
years. So
Yeah.
you were still in college when you started that, huh?
Yeah, I was in between freshman and sophomore year of college. So way back in 2012, 2013.
A great collection of both car content from not just your community but from all around, and it is one of the more well-known pages in the industry. What I want to talk to you about today, again, because you've been doing it for a lot of time, so you definitely get the flag of like an OG creator because you've been at it for so long. When it comes to putting together partnerships with brands, you've had a lot of experience there, and I think something that you and I were talking about earlier, that I think a lot of creators, there's not a ton of data on this. There's, especially specific to our industry, because our industry functions a bit different, right? And there's not a lot of data out there on this. And a lot of people, it's a taboo conversation. People get funny with money, right? And a lot of creators don't know how to broach the subject of how do you throw out a number to a brand? What happens in the process? So, you've had some interesting experiences there. And I think some of this goes to, what is your advice to the brands when it comes to budgets and what we're paying?
So one thing we didn't talk about earlier, and I just thought about this, is that this is the disconnect between like the automotive space in terms of like the smaller companies, maybe
Mm.
not like the huge oil companies or the OEMs per se, is that they do have formulas for judging engagement and what your post value is worth based on prior posts that you've done. They have websites and they have companies that can basically collect all that data and spit out a number.
Yeah.
The only time I've seen that very relevant and useful, again, is when you're working with major brands, usually through an agency, because they have a lot of money and they understand what they're doing, right? But then when you start getting into the smaller brands, smaller companies that don't maybe utilize that function or that feature, it becomes uncharted territory, so to speak, because there's no baseline as to what, or maybe there's no baseline that they know of to equate what your value is worth for posts or your time. And so then it becomes this guessing game, or this, I don't even know what you'd call it, but basically this almost sometimes not even back and forth of where a company will ask you, they'll present to you what they want, and then they'll tell you to give them a number. And it's happened to me where I'll give them the number and they'll either come back and say, oh, that's too much. We appreciate your time. We'll go to the next person. Or you don't hear from them again. You don't hear from them at all. They don't even respond. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure that's not how business deals go. Usually there's some sort of negotiation. There's back and forth. That's how business happens, right? Never is it to where the number is just a number. Very rarely. Because any smart business person that's trying to buy something is always going to try to negotiate. To some degree, there's always people say, oh, the price is firm. Price is never firm. When there's dollar signs in front of you, if somebody walks up and tries to, counter you with a slightly lower number, they're going to try to do that. So
Right.
it doesn't make sense why companies don't do the same thing when it comes to working with content creators, mainly because I think they feel like they can go and find somebody cheaper, particularly if you come in with a number that's well above what they're willing to pay, which I again think leads into the next question that you have, or the next point, I guess. I don't know if you want me to lead
Yeah,
into.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but basically like where I've come to the point now where because companies are just so vague with their asks. I'm to the point now, I don't give them I ask them what their budget is for the project. And when they tell me the budget, then I tell them what I can do for them within that budget.
Yep.
Because otherwise, I could be shooting myself in the foot, right?
Yep.
Or doing the opposite where I oversell myself, which doesn't happen that often, but I could oversell myself and then they don't come back to me. So I'd rather just have that blunt argument and flip the page on them or Uno card them, and be like, hey, yeah, be like, nah, be like, hey, like you clearly have a budget. You have a want and a need for me to help
Yeah.
with this campaign. You tell me what you've allocated towards this campaign, and then
Yep.
and thus I will then tell you what I can do with you, do for you within that cost.
And I love that, Garrett, on a few different points I want to touch on. So the first one you talk about the failure to negotiate, I find this one really fascinating, but I can empathize with it as someone who doesn't always love what is perceived conflict, or like, oh, I don't want to get into a back and forth, or oh, I don't know, or oh, what's the best way. And you kind of said it two ways of, so if you came with a number that was higher, it is absolutely, so I'll say this for the brand, so listen up, it is absolutely okay to go, ooh, that's a bit more than we were thinking, because sometimes they may not know what their budget should be. And I've
Right.
certainly gone into situations where maybe I didn't have a budget carved out. I'm curious to see what that person is offering. But then I am always willing to be like, okay, wow, okay, it's that much. So that's out of my budget. So what can you do for maybe this amount? Or like, what can we peel back? So it's a little bit to what you're saying. Maybe it's not a whole install video. Maybe it's not, this many pieces of content. Maybe it is just a little bit less, and it's a way to try it out, get the brand to feel comfortable. But that negotiation should absolutely happen. And I love your Uno reverse card, which my son does to me all the time. He's 8. He's like, Uno reverse, mom.
Hey, that
Um,
can start some fights in the household.
I know, it's so great. But I'm always like, that's not how it works in real life, buddy. But I do like that. You actually just gave me an example where it does work that way in real life. Is for the brand, if you do in fact have a budget carved out, this is when we talk about the partnership. Work with your partner so that you can figure out what makes sense. And, I just did this with someone too, where they said, well, maybe this. I said, well, this, it's a little high. Maybe that. And we went back and forth and we went around a few times and we got to an area where we both felt comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And, and I think that is part of it. And I also just want to touch on what you talked about the lack of kind of data in our space. I mean, one nuance where we're different from what I call mainstream content creator partnerships or mainstream influencer marketing is, in some cases, the product value can be much, much higher in our space. It can be much more expensive.
100%. 100%.
And so, but that's your point, then you factor that in. And so I will say there is a little tool in Autofluencer. We actually did an article about it. You can read it. It's on our blog on our website, all about what to pay content creators. And we give the kind of the range and the things that impact that. And then we do say in there, if you're giving them a $2,000 product, you might take that off the way you're thinking about it. I will say though, a lot of creators I talk to are very savvy, and they're like, "Yeah, it might retail for $2,000, but I know that's not the cost."
Oh yeah.
So
That's retail. That's not cost.
you could try it as a brand to hit it against the retail, but they might come back and say, "Let's take the cost off of it." So, but I think that's a really good point, and those are really good tips. Both for the creator to keep in mind, and both for the brand to keep in mind that if you are truly trying to build a partnership, you got to have back and forth. And I will say to the brands that ghost or, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, is, if maybe you decided there was like, oh, maybe this isn't the right partner for us, take budget out of it. But if you really, if you went to someone like Garrett or whoever the creator was, and that's the person you wanted to work with, find a way to work with them, right? Go back and forth on that budget. There's nothing wrong with that. That is okay. That is, to your point, that's business. That's negotiation, right? We're not walking into the Walmart and trying to buy a box of toilet paper and negotiate. Like, this is much more important. This is a much bigger service. By the way, Walmart uses a ton of influencers, folks. So just so you know. You also had another point that I think this is really important for our audience, for the community to hear, is when you short sell yourself,
Yeah.
that hurts all creators.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, talk a little bit more about that, and kind of your thinking. Would you have done anything different on how you priced yourself over the last years as your page grew, as your notoriety grew?
My case may be a little more complicated just because, again, like see my content creators in my space and my friends, right? Their brand and their image has always been at the forefront from the very beginning, right? So my brand has just been a brand. It's just been a name called American Muscle HD. It wasn't until maybe the last 5, 6 years where I've been really promoting myself along with it, which it is what it is. I mean, I can't go back and change. I can't change that now. I'm just trying to get ahead of it or get, you know, back on the train, so to speak. Their value may been greater than mine, even though I may have had a larger following. Their value was greater than mine simply because they're more personable to their audience and their
Right.
fans.
There's more storytelling.
There's more storytelling. So from that regards, I feel like I was behind in the ask, for money because I didn't have the same impact to my audience that they did. Even still, given the fact that I had a lot of, followers and engagement, it just didn't translate the same. Now that I've kind of made that switch and I've been kind of going about it differently, I've realized that, yeah, I have been like underselling myself. And again, to your point, it can hurt everybody else because again, if a company goes and says, hey, they work a deal with me and they're like, hey, we'll do this for this price because he said, and then somebody else comes in and they may have a better understanding of what the value, and then they were like, no, this is my price. But then they'll be like, well, Garrett only charges this much. So I've had that happen where people have undercut me, not necessarily because they knew me, but they did. And like, it kind of pissed me off because I'm just like, bro, why in the world are you only charging this company? This is years ago, but like, why are you only charging this company this much money, this little bit of money to do this? And then the company, like when I remember that I told the company, I was like, yeah, this is my price. And they came back to me and they were like, oh yeah, well, this guy did it for this much. You should know.
Right.
He's like, the guy, what really pissed me off was the guy was like, you should do more homework and know what your competition charges. I'm like the hell? I'm like, man, screw them. I'm like, I'm not worried about they over here down, selling themselves for pennies. Like that's not my concern. That's
Right.
their fault. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Don't put that off on me and get an attitude with me because I'm charging what the price should be. Probably not even enough, but more than what they are. Don't put that on me. And that really pissed me off. And I was just like, so to the point, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Even if I have been, I don't want to continue to be that guy. So like I said,
Right.
I've been being more proactive about putting my foot. I'll turn deals down, if I'm not, if the company's not, because again, I don't want to come in and be like, oh, companies be like, oh yeah, Garrett only. I don't want to be known as that guy in the industry. So I'm trying to be more proactive in knowing where the standard is
Yep.
and knowing my value and my worth so that
Yes.
I'm not shooting other people in the future in the foot.
Right.
It's
Well,
hard. It's hard, but you gotta be able to, yeah.
yeah. And it's all hard, right? Each creator needs to know your own value. And I would say having data to back that value up is really helpful, right? I mean, that's certain area what we've seen and why we've spent so much time on building out the reporting and autofluencer for creators and for brands is so that you can see that data and the things, but even more important than just the data for the sake of data is if you're a brand, it's understanding what are your intentions, what are your goals, and what are your objectives, and who is the right partner for that, and knowing that each creator is going to be a bit different in what they bring to the table. So really understanding that and knowing what you're looking for there, and making the right partner choice, but not trying to. And we get asked this a lot, and I'm like, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
It's
It's
never that.
not. These are humans who are storytellers who have while a lot of the communities that people have built and audiences built overlap for sure, right? But the nature of the channel, the nature of the way you interact with your audience, the way they engage, what they come to you for might be very different, and everybody's going to be different there. And I think that's something really, really kind of important. Now, I will say something. It's hard to totally ferret out for a brand, and I don't know how we could ever do a report on this or somehow get intel on this. I don't know. Maybe AI will be the savior for this one. But is being able to look at a creator and to know if their audience thinks they've sold out.
Oh, Lord.
And I think that's something where, like with you, I don't see that at all. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that it is. And that's where it is important too to turn down deals that don't feel right to you, that
Yeah.
aren't worth your value. Because as a brand, they have to understand that this is a delicate line that creators, like I follow a lot of mainstream creators just because I'm on just social way too much. And it serves me up like, oh, you follow creators, let's try everything. And I follow a lot of creators in parenting, and they can be funny, but I've stopped following them because every single thing they do is a paid sponsorship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? You use all these products? Really, girl? Like, how many different types of yogurt do you feed your kid? Really?
Yeah.
So it's a delicate balance, and you can lose out. And as a creator, this is your brand and reputation.
For sure. And once you lose that, you're kind of dead in the water. It's kind of hard to
And
it's
like
kind
for
of hard to
you,
get the trust back from your followership when you do it when you do that.
it's an 11-year business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, I also think sometimes brands don't have the healthy respect that you've been building American Muscle HG for 11 years. We've got
Yeah.
brands that are in business right now that have been around 11 years, some of the
Right.
newer brand, so that's a long time, to
Yeah.
build that audience. Um, and I will say that, it's to that end, and I want to tie into this last thing having to do with the brands is you've been building your audience for 11 years. You know them. While you may not know all 2 million people's names and who they are, you know their vibe. You can
Yeah.
tell what hits, what doesn't. You and I talked about something ahead of time that this is a challenge when brands want to get too controlling on how you should bring that narrative of their product to your audience. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I mean, like anything else, right? Companies have to do their due diligence. They got to make sure that their message is being conveyed for whatever the campaign is, which I'm fine with that. That's cool. But when they start getting real nitpicky about like your appearance or your like your wording, your verbiage, if it's not like and it's like very rarely does anything that I do. You can ask anybody that knows me personally. Like when I do podcasts, when I do any kind of speaking of any sort, and this has been ever since I was a kid, I don't write anything down. I may think about it prior, but whatever comes to my head in the moment when I'm talking is what I'm going to say. And that's just me. I don't need to do the note card thing. I don't need to study a prompt or anything. I don't like that because it doesn't come off as genuine. That's not Garrett. And so my thing is like, and again, to the point, if there's a sort of script or like baseline of something to be said, I will make it my own, basically saying the same thing but in my words. So when a company comes in and it's like they start nitpicking the little things that I say, but then basically it comes down to where I have to damn near say verbatim what I'm like, man, I don't even really want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because now it doesn't seem authentic.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like there's always a point where I turn an eye to it if the check's big enough. Clearly, like anything else. I mean, like,
Yeah.
when Shaq does a freaking, the general commercial,
Right.
I'm pretty sure he's saying exactly what they want him to say, but he's making $5 million off that commercial. So I was like, I would gladly just be like, okay, I'll say exactly what you want. But any other time, it's like, man, if you really want me to portray something to my audience for your brand, you should probably let me have a little bit more creative control as to how that goes, because I know what responds to my audience or how my audience responds to my content. Let me put it like that. So, and like I mentioned, it's to the point where it's like, okay, as long as I know I'm getting paid from you guys and you guys aren't want to listen to me, at that point, all right, whatever, cool. I'll do
Yeah.
what you want me to do, but don't be mad at me if it doesn't perform well because you didn't listen to me.
And I think that's such a good point. If you want someone as a brand to follow a script verbatim, hire an actor, get a professional film crew, and you're easily looking at anywhere between 10 and 20 grand for that spot.
Oh,
right?
that's minimal.
And you've got SAG rights in there, you've got music right. I mean, there's a whole bunch you have to contend with. But if that's what you're looking for, that's the way to go. If you are looking for content that will bring an audience to you that is genuinely engaged, that respects the person who's talking about this product, you've got to let them engage with their audience. And again, you've been doing it for 11 years. I mean, a lot of brands in our industry and in all industries, it's not specific to the aftermarket, but many have waved the white flag on social media and somewhat given up because it's hard, right? It is hard to know what hits. It's hard to know what resonates. And so when you have someone who is so close to it, who has an audience, and you know what resonates, you know what hits, and there's no guarantees, but it always boggles my mind when brands try to just throttle creative control. And it comes up again and again on Creators and Coffee because other creators, I mean, literally every creator says the same thing. And so I think it's important to repeat it.
Yeah. And I mean, granted, if they didn't need the help, they wouldn't have reached out.
Right.
You know, if they were doing it right on there, not to say they're not doing it right, but if they didn't need help to promote something, they wouldn't reach out. They do it on their own. So in that regards, I'm like, hey, like, and I'm not a hard person to work with, but it's like, man, come on. Like when you start dictating like the look, you know, or the hot, it's like I'm losing all the whole point of me
Right.
being me. At that
Right.
point, it's like, well, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I might as well be one of them little inflatable balloon thingies that just float. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
And this is an interesting note too. In any other field, including commercials, graphic design, there are only so many revisions that are allowed to a brand, right?
mhm.
When you hire someone, usually in creative. So that's something to contemplate too, because they're not paying you for all these revisions.
No, and that's the thing. Like, and it's funny because I actually
And it's
talked
a
to
lot of time that you're
I
putting
talked
in,
to
and
one
your
of my
time is
friends
money.
about it to the point where, like, you know, when you got to reshoot something multiple times, that's your time, you know, used for something else, right? And so it's like, man, at that point, it's like, man, I'm gonna need you to pay up for the time,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you like to reshoot if we didn't, you know, but whatever.
For sure. Now let's, certainly we'd be remiss if we didn't talk from a creator's standpoint. I think a lot of creators look at what you've built with American Muscle HD and are like, whoa. And they look at, you are for all intents and purposes, a professional content creator, and again, you've built this over 11 years. This was not an overnight success. You
Right.
didn't wake up and, like, I do this all night, but they probably glamorize it and think, I wish I could get there. What words of not caution, but like words
Realization.
of kind of, how they have the meme of like the reality versus the
It's
perception, right?
yeah,
Perception versus reality, like what people think I do all day, what I actually do all day.
man,
I
yeah.
want a little sense of what that's really like because I think it's important to hear.
Social media is all fake, in my opinion. That's what I tell people all the time. Like, people aren't gonna post the bad stuff, right? People aren't gonna post when they're down, when they're sad, when they're not, when no money's coming in that month because they don't have a deal or whatever. Nobody's gonna post it. They're gonna post all the good things. So it's such a phantasmal thing to
Yeah.
look at, in
Yeah.
my opinion,
Yeah.
because you're gonna see all the good things. You're gonna be like, man, this dude is rolling,
Yeah.
and it's like, I mean, yeah, I've been building what I've been doing for 11 years, right? So it may appear that way, but it's not, like, to your point, it's not all ways sunshine and rainbows for this. It's like
Right.
anything else. It's a job. The other problem too is that you see, the top guys or girls in any respective industry, and you think, oh man, that must be like what it's like for everybody that does it. It's like, no, man, the people that Cletus, like Cletus McFarlane, whoever else that you'd want to put, like Adam LZ, TJ Hunt, all these people, they're like the top 0.001% of content creators, respectively, in the automotive space, right?
Right.
They're very smart, they're very talented at what they do, and they found a very niche market to broaden their horizons beyond just social media content, right? Because you got
Right.
Cletus that took a made up persona of himself, turned it into this whole brand. Then he, went through all the ranks, and then he decided, okay, beyond social media and just creating content, I want something that's going to make me money on the other side. So he started doing events. So he bought a racetrack,
Yeah.
took a huge gamble on that. And I don't know his story. I don't know if he paid for that in cash or if he had investors. I don't know. He took a gamble. He bought a racetrack, and look at it. It's a huge thing. I mean, he has a dozen plus events there every year that sell out pay-per-view. He does
Yeah.
pay-per-view
Yeah.
and in person stuff, which is insane to me. So the man's rolling. He's an anomaly. The man is set for life, more or less. And so people look at that and they think that that's what it's like for every content creator, and it's like it's not like
Yeah.
it's again, it's a grind every day. You got to get up. You got to determine. You got to tell yourself how much time, how much energy am I going to put? Because you're not punching a physical clock like you would at a 9 to 5, but you got to determine how much energy and time you want to put into your work that day, whether
Right.
that's creating the content that you would use going forward, or you know writing down ideas as to what kind of builds you want to do so that you can pitch to brands. Is a whole lot of things that go into it. So it's not
Yeah.
just like you said, you just wake up every day and it's like, oh great, I made 10 grand a day. Doesn't
No.
work like that.
Yeah.
Doesn't
And
work like
it's like a hamster wheel, right? Like
that. Yeah,
that content. It is a beast that is never full.
yeah, you see, it's like at the end of the hallway, you see the light, or you see the goal, and you're chasing after it. And it doesn't seem like the hallway ever gets shorter. Like it just seems like
Yeah.
you're just constantly running in the same place because you're constantly just trying to chase the next thing. And that's not a bad thing. If you're purpose driven, if you're a driven person, then yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to keep you going. You're
Yeah.
going to constantly try to get to that spot. But it also could be tiring too,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're just like, all right, well, to what end am I doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah, money is the
Exactly.
goal, I suppose, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe that's not the goal. Maybe it's completing objectives. Maybe that's your goal. Maybe you're not worried about the money. But there's so many things that there's always something else to do.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it's never ending, especially if you were worried. I know I'm deviating a little bit, but like part of social media is, as much as you don't want to, as anybody doesn't want to admit it, you are catering to others, not just yourself. However much you divulge that into that, right,
Yeah.
versus what you do, could also dictate how tiring it could get. Because if you
Yeah.
feel like you're constantly seeking validation or approval from
Yes.
these random people on the internet with your content, you'll never feel
Mm-mm.
fulfilled, right? Because you're constantly going to think, oh, they didn't like this project, or I got to do better the next one. You really got to find a way to turn it off.
Yeah.
Like you want to make the content relatable and acceptable by your follower standpoint, but at the same time, you also got to realize that like not everybody's going to like everything that you do. And you
Right.
can't beat yourself up over it if they don't. So like you really got to do stuff for yourself. And if everybody else likes it in turn, then that's great.
There's so much there, right? I mean, it is, but I think it's helpful to hear even from you, that it's not sunshine and rainbows and it's not easy. It is a job. I think this is also a misconception brands have. They're like, oh, they just run around gonna get their cell phone out, shoot content. It is so much work. There's not only the shooting the content multiple times in
Editing.
most cases, it's then you got to edit it. Then you got to get it right. And you really, to your point, you have to know your audience. You have to have a plan of what's coming. It's not just always the best pages. Like, there is a plan there, and it's a constant feeding of the beast. And it is something that you really have to think about too, because now you're putting yourself in the public spotlight. And to your point, even if in the beginning you didn't care about the validation of those people, you were started really doing it for yourself. Man, that is a slippery slope you can easily fall into. Even if you were so secure in yourself and it didn't, it can wear on you. It is a constant kind of mental battle that you have to constantly, and we see like people like to get in a little, we've had a creator once, and the whole thing we talked about was like how she handles comments, because she's really funny about the way she does.
Mm-hmm.
And because, she's doing a build, it's a first time, it's a DIY. There's a lot of learning there. And she gets a lot of trolls that get up in her comments like, that was wrong. You should have done it this way. She's like, really? Why do you care so much? Like, you're not going to drive it. I'm not building it for you. Like,
I think I know who this is.
Yeah. So but you're always going to have that. And, you have to kind of stay above it. And I think those are all great tips. And for even the larger creators out there, My guess is a lot of them are resonating with what you're saying because even for them, they constantly have to feed the beast,
Yeah.
right? And then eventually, ideally, diversify, like you know, like Cletus has done with the tracks and some of his other endeavors, or Adam LZ has done with all of his R&D stuff, and we see a lot the Ford era, Solomon getting into. A lot of people also get into their own manufacturing
Yep.
and fabrication of stuff, which is, I think that's at one area where I'll say this industry, and I think other enthusiast industries are like this, but where it also really differs from mainstream influencers and content creators is almost everyone in the industry that starts to make it to a certain level, they end up giving back and staying in the industry as far as like building things or doing things that gives back or continues to make the industry better.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really cool facet of what we see with the content creators, because as even yourself, as you get bigger, there's more you do, you build more cars, you use more products, it constantly, it's like a circular loop,
100%.
which I love.
100%.
Well, Garrett, this was awesome. So many great tips here. Again, give him a follow across his different channels, and appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you at SEMA.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate the time. And yeah, I don't know. I hope anything that I said today made sense and
Totally.
was useful to anybody listening. So,
Yeah, that's great. All right. Take care, Garrett.
all right. Take care. Talk to you later.